A modern navy is not defined only by the ships that carry missiles, nor by the carrier that headlines its power projection. A modern navy is defined by its ability to remain at sea, to sustain itself far from home, and to maintain tempo without depending on foreign ports or diplomatic permissions. In this sense, logistics is not the silent servant of naval power. It is its core enabler. For France, the transition from the aging Durance class to the new BRF vessels within the FLOTLOG program represents a structural shift in how the Marine Nationale understands endurance, autonomy, and maritime strategy in a competitive world. For decades, the Durance-class support ships allowed France to maintain important but time-limited deployments. The Marine Nationale could send a task group across the Mediterranean or to the Atlantic, but long-duration missions were constrained by fuel, munition storage, and replenishment planning. These constraints were not simply mathematical, they were geopolitical. A ship that must refuel every 10 days becomes dependent on host nations, port diplomacy, and predictable patterns visible to adversaries. A ship that can sustain itself for weeks with replenishment at sea maintains uncertainty, flexibility, and strategic ambiguity. This is why the FLOTLOG program matters. The Jacques Chevallier, already in service, and the Jacques Stosskopf, preparing to enter full operational deployment, are not auxiliary vessels in the traditional sense. They are floating backbone structures of a distributed naval presence. Each BRF carries around 13,000 cubic meters of fuel, ammunition, and supplies. Each is equipped with advanced transfer rigs, enabling fuel and cargo replenishment in open sea conditions. Each incorporates dual-hull safety compliant with international maritime environmental regulations, reducing spill risk and ensuring operational legitimacy in environmentally sensitive waters. The symbolism is important for a French audience. Much attention in public discourse goes to aircraft carriers, submarines, stealth frigates, and hypersonic developments. But the truth is that any navy intending to operate beyond its immediate maritime frontier must first build a logistics architecture before building combat architecture. This is the philosophy behind the FLOTLOG approach: naval presence as infrastructure. Jacques Stosskopf, in particular, represents an evolution rather than a duplication of Jacques Chevallier. Lessons from the first vessel are being incorporated into the second. Internal storage configurations have been optimized, crew accommodation has been slightly enhanced for extended deployments, self-defense has received refinement, including improved readiness of close-in protection systems. Even seemingly mundane changes, such as onboard workflow optimization for loading and unloading cycles, produce significant operational dividends measured not in image, but in tempo. The ability of a task group to maintain constant activity without logistical dead time. The location of operational assignment is equally revealing. Toulon, home port of the Charles de Gaulle carrier group, is also emerging as one of the main hubs for BRF operations. In practical terms, this means the Mediterranean theater will soon have persistent support capacity, enabling high-tempo deployments. But the story does not end there. France has increased its presence in the Indo-Pacific region over the last decade. If a French carrier group, or even a frigate-led task group, wishes to sustain operations near the Mozambique Channel, the Persian Gulf, Southeast Asia, or the South Pacific, it cannot rely on friendly ports alone. It requires its own mobile fuel bases. The BRFs are exactly that, sovereign support nodes. This is where logistics becomes geopolitical. A BRF allows France to maintain a naval presence in zones where influence is contested. It enables joint operations with partners without appearing dependent on them. It permits France to avoid the optics of begging for port access or external support. In coalition operations, a nation that brings its own logistics brings leadership credibility. When France arrives with the ability to sustain not only its own vessels, but offer replenishment support to those of partners, it becomes a net provider of maritime capability. French naval logistics also intersect with industrial strategy. The cooperation between France and Italy under Acre, involving Naval Group and Fincantieri, demonstrates a specifically European model, maintaining industrial sovereignty while pooling development costs and accelerating interoperability. French tax money is not being spent on imported solutions. It is being invested into a shared European naval infrastructure with French industrial leadership embedded into the process. The construction at Saint-Nazaire supports employment, strengthens local shipbuilding expertise, and reinforces France's strategic doctrine of sovereign industrial capability. However, not everything is linear progress. The delay of the fourth vessel, Gustave Zédé, to post-2030 timeframe reflects budget constraints and political prioritization. French defense planning for 2024 to 2030 must also accommodate funding for the nuclear-powered carrier Pang, additional FDI frigates, continued SNA modernization, and the development trajectory of the Franco-German SCAF Future Air Combat System. In this competitive resource environment, logistics vessels can be politically vulnerable because they lack the glamour of flagship combat platforms. Yet the logic of maritime reality argues in their favor. Without logistics, the flagship platforms become theater-bound. If one considers future operational scenarios, the BRFs become essential. A French task group moving through the Red Sea under threat of hostile drone or missile attack cannot afford predictable port visits. A French patrol mission in the Indian Ocean protecting undersea cables cannot afford to return prematurely to Djibouti. A humanitarian assistance mission in the Caribbean, responding to a hurricane, cannot depend on civilian supply lines. The BRF's combination of fuel, water, medical capability, and storage capacity gives France operational freedom. This is also an evolution in French naval doctrine. The Marine Nationale is not aiming to match the scale of the United States Navy. Instead, it is refining a concept of global presence rooted in selective mobility. France is not everywhere, but France can be anywhere. This is a profound difference. It replaces quantity with persistence. It replaces density with flexibility. And this flexibility rests on logistics. As the timeline unfolds, by 2030, with at least 3 BRFs operating simultaneously and possibly 4 thereafter, the Marine Nationale will possess a logistical endurance curve significantly superior to 2020 levels. The French Navy will be able to keep forces at sea in the Mediterranean and the Indo-Pacific simultaneously without diminishing availability. It will be able to sustain submarine escorts, frigate screens, and carrier flight operations within one integrated support framework. It will be able to serve as a European anchor navy capable of supporting Allied vessels within joint task groups. For a French audience, the key takeaway is that naval power does not reside solely in weapons, but in endurance. Prestige does not come from a single carrier sailing majestically across the sea, but from the quiet certainty that it does not need to return home soon. Every time Jacques Stosskopf or Jacques Chevallier transfers fuel across a sea line, it is transferring something else less visible: strategic autonomy. France maintains overseas territories, exclusive economic zones, and maritime responsibilities spanning multiple oceans. To fulfill these roles credibly, from New Caledonia to Réunion to the West Indies, endurance is not optional. It is mandatory. The BRFs and the FLOTLOG program deliver that endurance in steel, fuel, and capability. They are the unseen foundation of French maritime presence. When a nation chooses to remain a maritime power, this is what it looks like.